Some American towns don't feel right, not abandoned, not dangerous, just wrong, like something happened there and the air never cleared. These are 20 of the creepiest small towns in America. 20. Sleepy Hollow, New York. Most towns borrow their identity from history. Sleepy Hollow built its entire identity around a ghost. Washington Irving's Headless Horseman was fiction when he wrote it in 1820. In Sleepy Hollow, the line between fiction and atmosphere dissolved so completely that nobody bothered redrawing it. The town renamed itself from North Tarrytown to Sleepy Hollow in 1996, not to preserve history, to become the story. The old Dutch Reformed Church cemetery predates Irving's tale by over a century. The graves are genuine, the names weathered past reading, the iron fence rusted into permanence. Walk through it after dark, and the legend stops feeling like literature. Sleepy Hollow is the rare place where the horror was imported, and the town grew around it so completely that now you cannot tell which came first. 19. Dudleytown, Connecticut. Dudleytown was a colonial settlement in the Berkshire foothills that every family who lived in seemed to leave in tragedy. Madness, death, disappearance, the pattern repeated across generations and across surnames until nobody was left to continue it. The forest reclaimed the land so completely that finding the original foundations requires knowing exactly where to look. Access is now restricted by the private organization that owns it. The official reason is environmental preservation. That explanation satisfies some people. Locals who grew up near Dudleytown tend to offer a different kind of silence when you press them further. No dramatic stories, no specific claims, just a particular reluctance to discuss it after dark that communicates something words apparently cannot. Dudleytown didn't become abandoned, it was avoided. There is a meaningful difference between those two things. 18. Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Between 1966 and 1967, dozens of Point Pleasant residents reported seeing something. A winged humanoid figure, 7 feet tall, with glowing red eyes that witnesses described as hypnotic and deeply wrong. The sightings were consistent enough across unconnected people that dismissing them required deliberate effort. 13 months after the first reported sighting, the Silver Bridge collapsed into the Ohio River, killing 46 people. The Mothman sighting stopped immediately after the collapse. Point Pleasant has never fully decided what to do with that timeline. Today, the town has a Mothman museum, an annual Mothman festival, and a 12-foot stainless steel statue downtown. The commercialization is genuine, so is the unease underneath it. Locals tell the story without the performance that tourists expect. That flatness in their delivery is the part that stays with you longest. 17. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Since 1962, a coal mine fire has been burning beneath Centralia and shows no intention of stopping. Scientists estimate it will continue burning for another 250 years. The ground cracks open in places releasing smoke and carbon monoxide. Surface temperatures run dangerously high in spots that look completely normal from above. The government relocated most residents and officially eliminated the zip code in 2002. A handful of people refused to leave and remain there still. The abandoned stretch of old Route 61 outside town has been consumed by vegetation and graffiti. The asphalt buckled and split by heat and frost and complete neglect. Centralia does not feel haunted in any traditional sense. It feels like a place where the earth itself made a decision about human presence and is slowly following through on it. 16. Cairo, Illinois. Cairo sits at the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, which should have made it one of the great American cities. For a time, it genuinely was. Then the rivers that built it began flooding it repeatedly. The industry left, the population collapsed from 15,000 to under 2,000, and Cairo began its long visible decline into something that defies easy categorization. Entire blocks of ornate Victorian architecture stand completely empty and rotting. Buildings that cost fortunes to construct are being reclaimed by weather and neglect at a pace that feels almost deliberate. Cairo doesn't feel like a ghost town because the people haven't entirely left. It feels like a city watching itself disappear in real time, unable to stop the process, too proud or too exhausted to look away from what is happening to it. 15. Mentone, Alabama. Mentone sits atop Lookout Mountain, where the fog arrives thick and early and stays well past any reasonable welcome. It was a resort community in the early 1900s, drawing visitors for the mountain air and the views. Then a series of fires, floods, and incidents that locals connect in ways that make outsiders shift uncomfortably, change the atmosphere in ways that fresh air alone could not fix. The town is small and quiet, in a way that feels less like peace and more like held breath. The old resort structures that survived are beautiful and slightly wrong, preserved in a state that suggests interrupted plans rather than completed ones. Mentone has never shaken the feeling that something was left unfinished here. The mountain keeps its secrets efficiently. The fog helps with that considerably. 14. Helltown, Ohio. In the 1970s, the federal government purchased the entire township of Boston Mills to create a national recreation area. Residents were displaced. Buildings were left standing with no demolition timeline. Locals renamed it Helltown and began filling the abandoned structures with stories that spread faster than any official explanation could contain. The imagery did not help the government's case. A church with an inverted cross, a school bus rotting in the woods, abandoned houses collapsing along empty roads. Whether the cross was deliberately inverted or simply deteriorated into that position remains genuinely unresolved. Helltown is a place where government bureaucracy and human imagination combined to create something neither intended. The result is unsettling in ways that are completely explainable and somehow still not explained. 13. Ocracoke, North Carolina. Ocracoke is accessible only by ferry, which establishes a relationship with the mainland that feels conditional rather than guaranteed. Blackbeard chose this island as his base of operations for that exact reason. In 1718, he was cornered and killed here, decapitated in battle, his head mounted on the bowsprit of the victorious vessel. Legend holds that his headless body swam 3 times around the ship before sinking. The island has a quality of light in late afternoon that photographers describe as extraordinary, and everyone else finds subtly wrong without knowing why. The community is tight, long established, and deeply aware of its history in ways that tourists rarely anticipate. Ocracoke is not performing its darkness, it simply never separated itself from it. 12. Roanoke Island, North Carolina. In 1590, a supply ship returned to the Roanoke colony to find 117 colonists completely gone. No bodies, no signs of violence, no struggle. One word carved into a wooden post, Croatoan. No explanation has ever satisfied historians, archaeologists, or anyone who studied the evidence carefully. The lost colony remains one of the most genuinely unresolved mysteries in American history. The site is preserved and tours run regularly. Standing where 117 people simply cease to exist produces a feeling that no historical marker adequately prepares visitors for. The information boards explain the facts clearly. The facts do not make the feeling go away. Roanoke Island is unsettling not because of what is known, it is unsettling because of how completely nothing is. 11. Gibsonton, Florida. For decades, Gibsonton was the official off-season home of American carnival and circus performers. Giants, sword swallowers, fire eaters, and sideshow veterans retired here permanently. Zoning laws were adjusted to accommodate elephants and carnival equipment in residential yards. The post office installed a counter low enough for little people. Gibsonton built itself around the extraordinary and called it ordinary. The performers are mostly gone now. What they left behind is a town with an energy that resists straightforward description. The remaining structures, the old lots, the particular way residents discuss their history, all of it carries something tourists drive through without fully processing. Gibsonton doesn't announce its strangeness, it simply never learned to hide it. That is somehow more unsettling than anything deliberate could be. 10. Moonville, Ohio. Moonville disappeared so completely that its only remaining structure is a railroad tunnel cut through a hillside in the Zaleski State Forest. The town is gone. The tunnel stayed. Multiple deaths occurred here, under circumstances that vary depending on who tells the story. The tunnel doesn't feel like abandoned infrastructure. It feels like an entrance to something unfinished. Visitors consistently describe the same sensation, that they interrupted something already in progress before they arrived. 9. Antelope, Oregon. In the early 1980s, followers of Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh systematically moved into Antelope, out of the original residence, and renamed the town. What followed included the first large-scale bioterrorism attack in American history, deliberately contaminating salad bars with salmonella, sickening 751 people. The cult collapsed. The town reclaimed its name, but the experience of having your community quietly occupied and weaponized leaves a mark that no name change reaches. Original residents describe Antelope with a wariness that never fully relaxed. 8. Braddock, Pennsylvania. Braddock absorbed a catastrophic military defeat in 1755, became a steel boom town, watched the mills close, and lost 90% of its peak population. Carnegie built his first library here as a gesture toward workers whose labor made his fortune. The library still stands. Most everything else is collapsing behind preserved facades. Braddock feels less like a declining town and more like a place specifically and repeatedly selected for punishment by forces that never identified themselves. 7. Deadwood, South Dakota. Wild Bill Hickok was shot in the back of the head here in 1876. Calamity Jane is buried beside him by her own request. The entire town is a national historic landmark built on gold, gambling, and violence that history has since romanticized past recognition. The casinos are open. The tours run daily. But the actual graves of people who died actual violent deaths are right there. Deadwood is creepy because of how comfortable everyone became with what is underneath it. 6. Picher, Oklahoma. Picher sits on top of abandoned mine shafts that collapse without warning. Chat piles, mountains of toxic mining waste, loom over empty neighborhoods. The EPA designated it a Superfund site. Most residents accepted government buyouts and left. A few stayed on ground that is actively dangerous to stand on. Picher is not haunted in any traditional sense. It is chemically and structurally hostile to human presence. Somehow, that is considerably worse than anything supernatural could manage. 5. Denton, Montana. Denton is an unremarkable farming community in central Montana where a quiet history of unexplained disappearances accumulated across different decades. Local law enforcement attributed them to the landscape, exposure, accidents, winter. People who grew up there described something more specific. Not supernatural claims, just a particular quality of unease the town produces after dark. A feeling of being observed with no logical source for it. Denton is not famous. That absence of attention is somehow the most unsettling detail. 4. Salem, Massachusetts. 20 people were executed here in 1692. Salem eventually processed that guilt by turning it into an industry. Witch museums, haunted tours, Halloween crowdsing in the hundreds of thousands. The commercialization is total and self-aware, but the original graves are still there. The names are still readable. The memorial to the victims sits in the middle of all the tourism and refuses to be absorbed by it. Salem is creepy because of how cheerfully everyone agreed to move on. 3. Optimism, Kentucky. Optimism is a small Appalachian community whose cheerful name belongs to people who left over a century ago. Economic collapse arrived and became permanent. Generational poverty replaced whatever hope prompted that original naming. Locals discuss the town's history in the same flat tone they use for weather. Not bitter, not resigned. Something more specific. The effect of people who absorbed so much for so long that the weight became indistinguishable from normal. The sign at the edge of town has been wrong for generations. 2. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. 51,000 casualties in 3 days. The bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil produced a landscape so saturated with death that park rangers, tourists, and committed skeptics have reported unexplained phenomena here for over 150 years. The battlefield is immaculately preserved. The tours are professional. None of that changes what it feels like to stand in the wheat field at dusk after the buses leave. Gettysburg is creepy the way history is creepy when it refuses to stay past tense. 1. Savannah, Georgia. Savannah was built on top of its dead, literally. Colonial cemeteries fill the historic district, and the rest of the city was constructed around burial grounds never fully mapped or acknowledged. Yellow fever killed thousands. The Civil War added more. Savannah absorbed all of it without demolishing the architecture that witnessed it. Spanish moss hangs over streets where the past is not metaphorically present but physically embedded in the soil. Savannah is number one because it has the highest concentration of unresolved darkness per square mile of anywhere in America. These towns are not theme parks. The darkness in them is not decorative. It grew from real events, real disappearances, real deaths, real systems that failed real people. America has a habit of turning its worst moments into destinations. These 20 towns are proof that some places absorb what happened to them so completely that the atmosphere never quite resets. Drive through them in daylight if you want. Just pay attention to how you feel when you leave.